since I just spoke, I get to go last because I used up everything I had to say before. But I will tell you a little bit about my own background. My initial training was in the economics of education at the Comparative Education Center that came in second in the poll that Martin talked about. I mean, we got half the votes, but we actually thought we were better. But in any case, like economists generally, I wasn't particularly interested in a country. I was interested in a problem. And I asked my advisor at the time and I found out that I couldn't find the data that I needed to look at this problem just in any country. I actually had to figure out a country to look at. And she said, well, there are three places in the world that have the data. And this is 1979, so those of you with a historical memory will get this. The first one was Greece. The second one was Iran. And the third was Brazil. And Iran, of course, was going through a revolution, and Greece was under a dictatorship. And Brazil was under a dictatorship, but seemed like the most attractive option. So I said, well, I'll go to Brazil. That would be great. So I did my doctoral dissertation in Brazil. I worked on this problem. I figured out the problem. I finished my dissertation, sort of looked up at the end of a dissertation, and I realized that I didn't know anything about Brazil. That I knew a lot about this problem, but I didn't understand Brazil at all. And I committed myself at that point to figure out why Brazil was the way it was, why Brazil, why the Brazilian education system was at the time as bad as it was and as resistant to change as it was. And Paulo said I lived here for 10 years. That's not quite true. I was back and forth all the time for 15 years. I was spending a month or two every year in Brazil. I was a Fulbright professor in Bahia. I committed a substantial part of my professional activity to Brazil, but didn't actually live here. And what happened to me in the course of working on Brazil was that I became an ex-economist. I realized that what mattered in thinking about education was not sort of the economics, or I won't be as strong as that. That what mattered to me about education was not the economics of education, but the politics of education. That to understand Brazil and then, on reflection, to understand the United States, that what the dynamics that drive the system, from my point of view at least, are political dynamics, the conflicts of interest, conflicts of ideology. And I worked here to understand that, ended up writing a book about Brazil in 1995. As I said this morning, I wrote a book about why Brazilian education was so bad, why it could never change, and then it changed, and it got better. You know, so that was I was glad that my book came out before that started to happen, because and then my life changed, and I couldn't travel anymore, so I decided that I would work on similar kinds of questions in the United States. And what has happened to me in the years since is that I've gotten more and more interested, not so much in doing research as in figuring out why research matters in the policy system, how research can change education policy, how research can have an influence for good in the way that education systems work. And I sustained an interest in research for a time, but then the opportunity came to come to California, to come to PACE. And at that point I decided, well, this is what really interests me. It's not so much doing research as working with researchers to maximize the impact of their research in the education system. And I will just, I'll close by endorsing something I think that all of my colleagues have said, which is that I've been at Stanford now. I've been in California for 5 years. I've been at Stanford for 3 years. And my experience at Stanford has absolutely confirmed what my colleagues have said, which is that there's just a tremendous openness at Stanford to working across disciplinary boundaries, to ensuring that the work that each of us does has the maximum impact. And I experience this directly every day, because there's an old saying, old joke about academics, right, that there are two dangers in the academic life. And one is that you know more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. Okay? And the other is that you know less and less about more and more until you know nothing about everything. And I discovered that I've succumbed to the latter danger. I know nothing about everything. But my job requires me to know something. And so I've discovered that at Stanford I can go to my colleagues, I can go to Martin, and I can learn, well, what do I need to know about the economics of education. I can go to Roy P. and learn, what do I need to know about the technology of education. I can go to Kenji Hakuta and ask, what do I need to know about bilingual education? And they'll tell me. Ed Hartle about assessment, they'll tell me. They give me the answer. So that I can pretend in public like this, I can pretend to know something about something. You know, but I've found that my colleagues are infinitely generous in helping me to understand problems sufficiently so that I can marshal the available research, so that I can bring the research to bear on a wide variety of questions, not just those that interest me personally, but those that are important for California's education system. So I have found it just a tremendously supportive environment, very fruitful environment for exactly the kind of work that I want to do, and I look forward to seeing some of you there.